And we're live. Hello and welcome to another breakfast and blockchain. Or
afternoon.
Afternoon. Brafternoon and blockchain. So today we've got a special guest, no stranger to anyone in the EOS.io space, Mr. Brandon Lovejoy. He is a current sitting Eden Chief Delegate for less than 24 hours here because we're about to be replaced.
Yeah.
Yep. They're gonna call the herd.
Cleaning out the.
I watched the last meeting last night. How does it feel to not be doing them? Well, again for a little while.
It hasn't set in yet.
Yeah.
I haven't processed. I was thinking about that this morning too. Like, there's like a whole element of like, I think I've emotionally or otherwise processed that this is like winding down for me anyway, because I'm not running again. But
you're not running?
He's gonna MC.
I'm gonna MC as my way of contributing, and then I just have so much to concentrate on with the ENF that I really can't. I can't do all this stuff at the same time. I'm not built like that. I'm more like.
I'm not built like that.
Oh, well, I'm a terrible generalist. So if I'm gonna get anything done, I need to like make extra effort to focus, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's like the fallacy of multitasking.
Yeah.
Like you're not really doing any of those individual tasks nearly as well if you just focused on one of them. Let's be honest.
Yeah. Yeah, truly.
Hello, Joshua.
Hello, top of the morning to you.
Top of the morning to you.
You got your brew?
I do. I have a chai tea and some mineral water.
Oh, brilliant.
I've got my tea.
Oh,
ooh, nice. And I've got like this halo right next to my head. That's pretty. I'm lucky.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Screenshot. It's a thumbnail.
Yeah.
Pretty cool teacup.
You got one of those nice looking trees behind you.
Yeah, Brandon's got some really good tea. He imports it. Isn't that right? You still importing your tea?
Well, I used to work for a tea company called Verdant Tea, and I still get all my tea from them because they're awesome. And they work with small family farms. They think of themselves more as like employees for the tea farmers rather than the other way around, which is really cool. So, yeah.
Yeah, we had some big news released today about the collaboration of chains working together, funding core development for EOS.io. So that's pretty big news. It's good to see that come out.
Yeah.
Has everyone seen that? What do you
should
think?
have.
I haven't seen that.
Yep. You have the official announcement that EOS, Telos, Wax, and UX Network are collaborating on a $8 million pot to then direct toward EOS.io protocol development work. So, big step.
Yeah.
My understanding is like some of the other chains that have been active in those discussions, File Proton particularly, are still going to participate in discussions. They're just not going to have a vote quite. So they'll have an opinion, which will be heard, but they won't have an explicit vote in how those funds are spent. So,
is that because they haven't put skin in the game yet?
In terms of the vote, that's exactly right. Yeah, they're not willing to pony up dough, so they don't get a vote, which is perfectly reasonable.
And it's an open door policy if anyone wants to get more involved. Further down the road, things start to gel and they have a better idea of how their development priorities might mesh with what the development priorities of the larger org are. They're welcome to join forces later. So it's not a one and done scenario, but yeah, we're really really glad to have Telos, Wax, UX, and EOS, committed to working together. So that's a huge deal.
The ENF is integral, haven't they, in forming this part?
I was just going to ask that. What's the involvement with the ENF in terms of this group?
Well, Eve is the voting member from EOS functionally in as part of this group, and then the ENF, has been kind of driving the initiative to get this group off the ground. But the goal, if I'm not speaking out of class, is to to let this organization become its own entity. So if we take on some roles now, in terms of organization or project management or media, ultimately that org should do those things for itself. But we're just kind of getting it moving, and the other chains are all supplying other excellent pieces of that puzzle. So um, it's not like the ENF is doing everything by any stretch of the imagination. But yeah, I mean, EOS is kind of the largest chain in some regards. So
You've got Wax on there as well, haven't you? So.
and Wax, yeah.
Yeah, that's one of the things that stands out to me, that UX is involved and that Wax decided to be involved too, because I think there were some concerns that maybe the priorities of the group wouldn't be necessarily prioritized around what Wax needs, which is a little bit different than the other chains. And it sounds like maybe they've figured that out, or they're willing to figure that out together. And it's a big move for UX, I think, also, which isn't, it's kind of a newer chain. It's not nearly as used as Wax or Telos or EOS.
Mm-hmm.
Well, ironically, what Wax needs to solve, UX can help greatly solve it, right? The Wax has a scaling issue in terms of they're the most performant in terms of usage blockchain in the space. And then UX has the ability to have, with their bridge, they've got the ability to have Wax transactions basically occur on a different chain, like UX using their bridge. So it's good that they're working together on this, because there's hopefully something that also maybe come of it.
I think it would be good if the outside community beyond EOS and the SIO start picking up on this sort of news. 8 million for core funding is a good step in the right direction.
Well, it went out to, let's see, this morning it went out on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, at least 11 different news outlets, 12 maybe. So should be pretty widespread.
Awesome. The thing I'm waiting for next is, what's the new name of the code base going to be?
Yeah. That's.
Do you know what it is, Brandon?
No, I don't. That's part of the work that this new group has to tackle. So.
I think, was it the London Olympics that was famous for the logo costing about $400,000 to pay to an agency? So hopefully the naming convention is not going to cost us that much out of that $8 million budget. But it's very exciting to hear that there's $8 million that's available to build the infrastructure. Do we know at all what priorities the group is thinking that there are, or how does that discussion proceed? Do any of us know?
They've been having ongoing calls that are recorded. So the last one that I've seen, the last recording that's been put up, was March 24th. And so there they were talking, the first thing to hit would be about $1 million towards SDK, software development kit stuff that the Grey Mass team would be taking. But there's all the blue papers that the ENF had put out. Those basically, if you were to holistically look at those, provide a very long list of projects. And so there is a list of things to tackle. In terms of the branding, that's actually something that they were working on far earlier. In the earlier calls, Justin from the Telos Foundation, he's the executive director of Telos, equivalent to Eve for Telos. And he was given the mandate to work on that. So I think it was about $160K. And he's gone off to work with an agency. I'm going to mute you, Gav, because you're a bit loud with the wind background there. So he's going to work with an agency to come up with a name. So that can't be, obviously that conversation in terms of publicly had ended, because as soon as they start talking about publicly, everyone's going to grab those domains and that'll be the end of that, right? So that's ongoing. And so hopefully, I think we should see, that won't have anything to do with in terms of the 8 million. I think that was another earmarked set of funds that the ENF had already put up for the project. So ENF is definitely really stepping up in terms of trying to collaborate. And I think very much kudos to Even team to try to extend that hand, because they don't need to, right? EOS has the lion's share of the market cap. They have all the capital they need to do this on their own. They could do it. They really don't need to work with the other chains. But I think it really speaks to the intention that's coming forward here. And Helios, we're I think a big part of that message as well, and trying to be EOS.io, and we're better together. And this is an example of that. They're now better together because now we can get the brains from Telos, and there's some genius people over in the Telos team. Like for example, Douglas Horn on those calls, he's he's long-winded, but he says some good things. So it's okay he's long-winded because he's smart, right? I don't mind people who are long-winded if they're actually intelligent. So there's a lot of great, and beyond Douglas, there's a ton of other great talent, Jesse and Justin, and there's a bunch of folks on that team who have done a lot in their blockchain and in the EOS.io. So really cool to see these teams all coming together. And then you see like UX with Guillaume, also incredibly intelligent guy who has built some incredible products in terms of the IBC bridge and their AMM that's going to come out, and some of the ideas with that EOS.io aggregator token. So it's nice to see these teams come together. And of course, Wax, they've just got such strong business sense and such market traction in the NFT and gaming space. So yeah, really cool to see them all come together, in the ENF kind of leading the charge there on bringing the teams together.
I'd be interested to see if we start having a unified narrative. I know that ENF quite a while ago were thinking about doing having their own website. So I guess this will come with the rebrand, almost like an ESIO website for the new brand. It's almost like a hub that represents the whole core infrastructure. And then from that position, you can push forward as a unified front and then compare yourselves to all the other chains. But together with all your capability, you'd be so strong. It'll really give us the edge, I think. So that's really interesting. Is that still on the cards, Brandon, do you think?
Yeah, I think the intention is to form like a coherent organization to be the umbrella organization, in front of the EOS.io group. What that looks like, I don't really know at this point.
Yeah.
Yeah, and for now, it's kind of a joint effort between all the different chains. But no, I think you're totally right. It's gonna be a huge sentiment shift if we can get everybody kind of pushing in the same direction from all these different chains on lifting each other up, instead of either just wandering off in different directions, like oblivious to each other's needs, or actively like fighting against each other, which we've had a little bit of in the past. So it's like a monumental change in direction in terms of getting all these different projects collaborating together. And I don't know exactly what it's going to look like yet. I haven't been on all the EOS.io Plus calls, so
yeah,
I guess it's hard for me to articulate the total vision of it. But
would you guys say what's happening here is sort of unique to any other ecosystem out there? Like, is there another example of what's happening here with these different chains that use the same software working together? Is that something that you see out there in the space, or does it seem kind of like an anomaly?
I think it's the first time it's happened in this way. Like, I think maybe Polkadot and Cosmos have not similar, but they're collaborating across chains. But and I'm not an expert in either of those two blockchain projects, but it seems like they have a different structure of specialization among chains for different things, whereas we've kind of all gone off into the wild and done our own thing, and learned, had our hard knocks and learned and evolved and innovated, and now we're coming back together as peers to collaborate on moving the whole, like lifting everybody up together and collaborating moving forward on like this common code base. So in some ways, even though it wasn't pre-baked, I feel like it feels like it's going to end up being like a more mature kind of process. What do you say, Gav?
Yeah, the SDK that Chris has mentioned, that's been on my mind as well. I probably brought it up earlier on. I think that's fantastic. To me, that's going to help bring in founders, business interest, investment, but also the developers, because it makes everything that much more accessible to developers. I think the SDK, I haven't seen the full list of the backlog or the opportunities, but I'd imagine that should be high up on the priority list.
Yeah, exactly. It is. That's why that was one of the ones. And that's where I think you saw, or I listened, and I'm curious, hopefully this most recent call, which would have been 2 weeks ago now, or a week and a half ago. I'm looking forward to catching up on that one because it's not out on YouTube yet. But the one prior, that was one of the issues I think Wax had pointed out, that that's not really a priority for them per se. So they were a little less interested in participating, because it's like, well, we're going to throw in some money, and yeah, it's not like the ENF is coming up with kind of I think it was something like 70% of the total funding was going to be ENF, and then these other chains combined were going to do the other bit. So it's kind of a great deal from that perspective. And the ENF wasn't going to take a vote increase, which you would think that they would be entitled to because they're throwing in more funds. But so they were quite fair about it. Oh, maybe even too fair, which that I think again speaks to the intention, which is awesome. But Wax was a little hesitant, but I think it obviously sounds like they've come around and they still see the greater value in this. And even though it's not the top of their priority list, which is scaling, not SDKs, that at least they're willing to still play ball and seeing the bigger picture here. Because the other thing that's going to happen, that if there's a bug, right? So this is the benefit of communication and all these projects using EOS.io. If one of these chains recognizes an exploit or a hack or a bug, pretty good to have this type of relationship to share that information right away. Because the last thing you want is to have a bug on one chain, they figure it out, they solve it, and then it gets exploited on another chain, and that communication didn't occur in time or efficiently to prevent it. So at least now, with this intention of working together in collaboration, those types of things will hopefully then not occur, right? When one chain notices something, they'll share that right away and share the fix right away. And I think that's one of the huge benefits that, again, all chains benefit from that type of coordination.
Yeah. I wonder how governance in Eden will play a role in this new infrastructure. And obviously, we've got the new Eden election, or the next Eden election tomorrow. So that's pretty interesting. As Brendan, you're not running this time, but you're taking a break. Do you think? How do you think it will go, and how do you see Eden kind of playing its role in the future collaboration of chains?
You're on mute.
You're on mute. You're on mute. I can't unmute you.
Sorry, I was probably like clearing my throat or something and didn't want to take over the show with my emanations. Yeah, I think I'm pretty stoked about the election tomorrow. I think is going to be pretty awesome. It seems like even if we have a lower turnout or like just as much turnout as we had last time, I think everyone that's going to be participating knows a lot more about what they're getting into and has had 6 months of, contemplation about how to leverage this process to advance their respective goals in the ecosystem, and whether that's a project that they want to fund in Pomelo or, if they want to dive in and get more involved in actually making Eden OS better and evolving the whole, that whole process, which some people are working on. Yeah, I think the election is going to be pretty cool. I'm really curious to see the outcome, because we haven't had a lot of fresh blood really enter in since last time. So it's almost like just a slight increase in new people, but mostly it's going to be like second round, knowing what we know now, with people that are still here, and so it might be pretty high quality outcomes. So I'm pretty stoked about. And then yeah, looking forward to watching them speed up the iteration. We tried to leave them with a new set of bylaw proposals that Chris kind of spearheaded the whole push for that. Well, the drafting of it and everything, he took that work on, and that if they adopt those bylaws, and even if they are imperfect, then they want to keep iterating and improving from there, we can speed up the cycle so there's less latency in the process, and Eden can get better faster, and hopefully they can get more funding from ENF or any other source that wants to fund Eden, and yeah, that could be awesome. And as far as how Eden might impact these other chains, I don't really know. I think the more successful Eden is on EOS, the more appealing it'll start to look to other blockchains or other communities that want a consensus process that can select leaders and distribute funding and any of the other variations that arise out of this experiment. I think mostly my guess is that people are looking at Eden so far still with a bit of skepticism and curiosity, as opposed to like, that's the way we need to move forward with our organization. But I think it has a chance to be a really cool solution for consensus and decision making. I'm also really curious to see where like Haifa and the other sort of DAO platforms land in this. It's like so many different groups are kind of coming at this problem from different directions that it's like a renaissance of DAO innovation, which is really cool, because I think no matter who wins, we all win. And there's multiple approaches and possibilities for doing this sort of thing. So
I know Gabriel and Joshua have been really looking quite heavily into DAOs recently and all the variations out there. How do you both feel about Eden compared to other DAO systems when it comes to selection of people in power or governance structures? Because Haifa DAO seems more like a system which you could utilize within a business, whereas EOS seems more specifically designed to select leadership. So, like you say, Brandon, they've both got different. They've got different specialties, but are still under the same umbrella. So, it's quite interesting.
I didn't mean to leave out Fractally too. Fractally is also like in the wings. So Fractally, Haifa, Eden. There's probably others I'm not even familiar with. Maybe Josh and Gabriel have some more intel on that.
Josh, go for it. You've been doing some new research on DAOs. Give us some insight.
Yeah, well, I've been deep diving into the whole landscape of what the market thinks DAOs are and the things that are trending and the DAOs that are popping. And I've been going through discovery processes and onboarding to join different DAOs, and some of them are maybe competitors of Haifa and Fractally, and maybe we'll see what direction Eden goes in terms of building DAO tooling. Fractally, I think, has its own unique niche. It'll be interesting to see how that's going to progress. I think it's probably going to be wildly successful because of the track record that the team is building that on. And I don't really see it too much as a competitor to Haifa or Eden or anything like that. They look very distinctly different in a lot of ways. Eden is unique because you're not really creating an actual DAO. Maybe you could come up with a different meaning for the acronym DAO, like digital asynchronous organization. I think is one thing I've heard floating around out there on like the Twitter spaces and stuff. It comes from the book More Equal Animals, and that was about a democratic process, a true democracy, and selecting for leaders. So Eden is really meant to be used in like towns and cities and at that level. That's the real intention where it needs to go. And ironically, that's probably the type of solution, if it works, if it's battle tested and it can be, make sense to adopt it in enough local networks, that's probably the solution to, increasing individuals' independence across the planet. So it'll be interesting to see if the Eden community can kind of preserve, or maybe not preserve, but will preserve the kind of the intention from More Equal Animals, from that book, for the principles and stuff and related things, but to really carve it into a value proposition and a business model where it's like an application and it's not so important. I mean, hopefully EOS uses it and benefits, and hopefully it runs on the EOS network, because I think that's a differentiator for EOS. I think that's something, I think it also differentiates Eden OS from like Haifa and other things if there's people are predominantly using it on the EOS network in particular. But I think it really needs to go out there and like be attractive and adopted by a lot of people that don't care about EOS, don't care about blockchain or crypto or any of that kind of stuff. They just want a better solution for selecting their leaders, because what they currently have is really bad.
Yeah, I'm dying to see an Eden-like process actually be deployed in a local city election in a major city somewhere in the world. If no one else does it, I'm going to have to do it, because I think it would win, to be honest. I think that process would outperform the political machinery if it was put to use like on a grassroots level.
Maybe that should be one of the explicit objectives of Eden moving forward, is how do we actually carry this into a public domain and engage with people who are outside of the EOS community itself. What Josh is describing makes a lot of sense to me. Seems like a good integrated picture of things there. My couple of just thoughts is this stuff roots from socionics, which evolved out of the pursuit of intentional communities and how tribal governance. And I think really the localization of governance is so fundamental. And that's, I think, what Lovejoy, what you're voicing as well. How do we bring like all these systems and theories and techniques to small locations that can actually have an impact on general normal day-to-day life, not just in an organization, but in a kind of a community, a local township community. I'm very keen to see things evolve in that direction. And maybe it is a case of how do we get out the door? In fact, in lean startup training, they teach that you can't build a successful startup by remaining in your office. You have to get outside of the office and go to where the people are, go to where the potential customers are, and have real world conversations. And you learn a tremendous amount more than you do just by coming up with theories or tinkering around with software or trying to build an MVP from inside your office. That's a really strong point in lean startup literature. Maybe that's something that we as a community actually need to do and go and see how could this happen in local towns and communities. Josh, I know you got a lot of ideas on this. Any other thoughts while I'm putting that little puzzle together for myself?
Well, I think there's a moment of opportunity with things like Eden for these different networks that host these software platforms. There's Eden, which is helping people form organizations. There's Haifa. There's Dowable on EOS. Telos or the company GoodBlock has an app that they're building that helps people with this kind of stuff. I feel like I'm missing something else. So there, just in our little ecosystem, we have real DAOs, and then we have DAO tooling being built to create, kind of facilitate what the market thinks are DAOs. And then you have Fractally, really trying to make real DAOs go mainstream. And we'll just have to kind of see how things develop there. I'm obviously very bullish on what Fractally's doing. The year of the DAO, or the years of the DAO, to me seem to be upon us. Like if we look at where crypto is trending, where market sentiment's trending, where the world is kind of trending, the need for these kind of organizations seems to be increasing in the market. And I think there's kind of like a wave coming that we can ride. We can catch it and ride it right now. And it's going to be interesting to see what happens. I mean, even DAOs are replacing the need for VCs, for venture capital firms, and venture capital firms are having to figure out, they're kind of having to reposition themselves. They're having to partner with existing DAOs, which is what most blockchain networks are. And they're also having to become DAOs themselves in many cases. So the landscape is changing these next 10 years, it seems like.
Joshua, could you go into a bit more detail about why VCs are having to do that? What is it that a DAO offers which makes it an essential component to a venture capital firm?
Well, they've just got their own sources of funding. They don't need all the capital from VCs necessarily. But what DAOs seem to be lacking is the mindset of VCs, the mindset of the startup culture, and the mindset that venture capitalists go through. That seems to be lacking in most DAO communities, from what I can tell.
Right.
So magic internet money plus, business objectives and profit motive. And this is actually, it's a little bit of a segue, but it's still the same kind of pattern is what we're seeing for Helios with the applications that we're receiving. A lot of projects have interesting sounding or even sophisticated tokenomics, but they don't necessarily match that against a real world business model of having customers. So they can do clever things with the tokens, where through minting and inflation and yield curves and staking, they can make magic internet money. But the challenge still remains, how does that scale into a business that can exist beyond the hype and hoopla of the next bull run as the token price goes up? And I feel, and so I'm curious in the space of the DAOs as well. Like, we're still not quite clear. Maybe Josh, you have some fresh insights on how to describe and define a DAO. What are the different types of DAO look like? But if we're talking about incentivization, that's one aspect, and then we're talking about governance as another aspect. What else is there to that puzzle that makes a DAO actually useful for, like, making magic internet money that can be deployed as venture capital into other projects? I feel like we need for me, I'm very visual, so I like diagrams, but Josh, maybe you have a few bullet points of consideration.
Yeah, I don't know if I know the answer to the question. I know what the market thinks are DAOs are internet communities that use smart contracts. And I know NFTs are starting to have a pretty strong use case in DAOs, where you can avoid, like a real DAO kind of starts like the way EOS did, and it's super decentralized and it has a token on the onset, and you're kind of going from super decentralized and you're gradually trying to introduce more centralization to kind of balance things out. And nowadays, people are kind of taking a different approach. They're starting off very centralized and then pushing toward centralization. And I think that has historically been a more successful approach to starting something. I don't know if I'd like there to be a better option, but that seems to always kind of work the best for some reason. Maybe it has something to do with just getting things done in coordination. But internet communities that are using smart contracts are basically what the market thinks DAOs are. And what DAOs seem to be trending toward now is what Eden already does, which is not having a token, especially in the beginning, maybe eventually, but starting off with membership NFTs. So then you're not in jeopardy of security laws or any of these kind of things that come with tokens. You don't have to be concerned about tokenomics or anything like that. You're just trying to actually build an organization and maybe shape it into something real before trying to introduce the more complicated things. And you don't necessarily even have anything viable. And it might not even be the right time to do it. It might not be the right time to raise funds from like a startup perspective as well.
So in the comments we have a message from Dr. Wu, and he's wanting to develop something that can be used to help indigenous Native American tribal communities. And this kind of sparks a thought process which I keep referring to when I think of DAOs. And it's not so much a question, but more of an interesting statement. So in the past, currently majority of businesses and communities have a centralized approach outside of blockchain technology. And as we start developing DAOs in this democratic process around tokenization, there's going to be multiple communities, almost as if they are forming a tribe themselves, interacting around this, localization of cryptocurrencies. And I'm wondering if there's something internal within us that is driving us back towards our kind of origin infrastructure development for communities and this tribal nature. I wonder if that's why it feels like a rather natural process. It seems like DAOs are a democratic, structured approach to tribal organization. So yeah, I was wondering if any of you have had a similar thought process around as to why we are so attracted to this process, to a DAO, essentially.
Yeah, I love those thoughts. Kind of relates back. This I mentioned before, the socionics is this body of knowledge that talks about governance before and without blockchain, and that led to the development of holacracy, which is basically a kind of a business application of socionics. And socionics itself took great inspiration from looking at tribal governance systems. And so I agree. It's like we're bringing that back and exploring it, ancient tribal governance, localization, and then finding ways to automate where possible, like Josh is saying with smart contract NFTs that hold voter rights or something. Again, that how do we facilitate governance? But it is about that localization, and I think that should be, it probably is, but it definitely should be a very, very big theme. And the groups of people that have attempted intentional communities, they haven't worked. Let's be clear on that. There are not that many successful intentional communities, and by that, what it means is a group of people getting together with the intention of creating local community, whether it be in, like, they buy a big chunk of land and they all get together and they say, let's work it out together and get out of the system, get away from the big cities, get away from politics, and do it ourselves. But inevitably they find a very, very difficult time of it, because people have different views and opinions of how things should be done. How many music nights should we have a week? What time of the night to call it quits so that the children can get to sleep, and this kind of stuff. So I agree, it's all about localization. That's where society's going. People are moving out of the cities because of all of the restrictions and the bad economies and things. So again, maybe like, that's why I like what Haifa is doing and connected with Seeds, is that they are directly, I think Haifa's trying to sponsor or give grants or something to 12 different intentional community projects. They call them regenerative projects at the moment. And I agree with Josh's sentiment that this is the time of the DAO, bringing that kind of governance to what you're saying, Wax, sort of localization. Mm-hmm. I don't know what comes of it, but this is probably a very important area of topic.
Yeah. So I guess leading on from there, at what point does a DAO become a country? And then what point does it become, larger than that, where the countries combined? And then do we end up back somewhere similar to what we currently have? Or does there need to be a restriction on the size of a DAO? To prevent, I don't know what the limitations are.
Can I segue us back real quick before we tackle that?
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to comment on a few things. I see Dr. Wu in the comments saying democracy originates from Native American tribal beliefs, which, the Iroquois Confederacy, you can read about. There's a lot of interesting stuff there.
Yeah, well, just real quick on that point, that a lot of people don't know the Bill of Rights in the United States comes from the Iroquois, I believe, right?
Yeah, I think it was greatly inspired by the Great Peacemaker, the Iroquois Confederacy, and all that history going back to the 1100s.
It started in Greece, didn't it?
Well, the word democracy certainly comes from Greece, but as it unfolded here in the Americas in terms of participatory democracy, like those ideas, those aspirations, I think there is arguably a good case to be made that observing the way that the North Native Americans here were doing things is is very significant. But what I wanted to point out is really like if you change the focus for a second, like the last few hundred years have been a total anomaly in the way that humans organize. And humans have been humans for like conservatively like 300,000 years, and maybe as many as a million years. So what I'm saying is that when Waxo, you're referring to like this urge that's manifesting in us to like form DAOs and kind of explore these alternate ways of relating to one another. It's like I would argue those are the dominant ways of relating that have just been kind of like shoved aside by this kind of rapacious, tyrannical sort of form of top-down governance that has only been possible in the last few hundred years due to industrialization and these like scales of power that kind of came to dominate the world that we live in. But I would argue that for the vast majority of human history, there's loads of evidence that humans have lived in all of our ancestors come from tribal settings, so it's very much in our DNA, very much in us, and for us to just remember that and be informed by that and let that guide us.
So that
and then
sorry.
Yeah, I had one other point, but mostly I just wanted to like,
if we all originate from a tribal culture to some extent, at various stages, but we've all ended up in the same position. The tribes got bigger, the control and power structures developed to have larger tribes to the point when there were dominant tribes, countries, states, etc.
Well, I would argue that there's a point where like, see, I take exception to the idea that like tribes like of any sort just naturally follow this progression into like another mode of like greater resource extraction, greater control of resources, like wider sphere of influence. Like, I don't think that's the normal trajectory. And I would cite as evidence of that the fact that there are plenty of tribes still existing in the world that still don't do that, and that live in relative like good relationship with their neighbors and the natural world around them. So it's not like a foregone conclusion that this is just like the ordinary progression of things. Like, but when one group starts doing, taking the war approach and like the dominator control the world approach, like it does kind of force everyone else's hand. So like, okay, now we need to like be able to contend with this in some way. And usually that's just like, okay, arm up and get as big as they are. And then it's like an arms race, essentially, like a cultural arms race to be able to like exert influence in the world. But it
kind of stems from, it's a survival mechanism, and then the projection of that into competition to survive. So I'm wondering whether that's something a DAO can have an influence over. It's very much built within our human nature to have this competitive approach to survival. So I'm interested because one of my points earlier is if we have multiple tribes, potentially there's competition amongst tribes, which there currently seems to be quite a lot of competition within the ecosystems of cryptocurrency. Everyone's competing to have the most gains. So yeah, I'm wondering if there's a way a DAO can fix that kind of innate infrastructure which we're all built upon. That's if we could tackle that problem, then DAOs would become a very interesting solution to societal development.
Well, what's really happening is the mentality of human beings to this point has been like we've just been led by external authorities dominantly. Everything we do is guided, and we rely upon external authorities to tell us what to do, to tell us what we can and can't do, how to run our businesses, how to spend our money, all of that kind of stuff. But it seems like for the first time, I want to say in history, but I don't really trust history that much. But as far as I know, at least as I can observe in recent generations of my family and stuff, there's an opportunity here where this mentality is evolving, and we're now kind of switching our operating system to where we can make decisions with our own internal authority, and we don't need external authorities for survival in the same way that we have. And I think I think every structure of civilization is based on our mentality. So we've had like one structure that has basically been us living in a survival state pretty much. And I think maybe we're now seeing a shift where every structure has to change. So we need, like, the current ways of organizing or doing business or political structures, not only those, but every kind of structure has to change. So we have to have new ways. And there's a transition, and I think that's what we're living through right now. To go back to your point about the like, what do we find interesting about DAOs? I think a real DAO is a company and a community and a country, which really fascinates me. Like, the more that we can have these kind of organizations, I think it's going to be very empowering for people individually and for collectives as well, where you can have a balance. And like, competition doesn't have to be a bad thing. If you don't have proper, it's like the extremes of centralization versus decentralization. I think that's very silly. You don't want either extreme, except for maybe in certain circumstances or contexts. You want the perfect balance depending on what the context is, to get the best result. And I think the same is for competition. Like, you don't want the extreme, and you don't want people who are in a survival state competing. So we have to, first of all, figure out how to outgrow the survival state that we're so accustomed to, in the way that we kind of structure things. That just always creates this survival mentality for the most part. And that's not a healthy way to be competing, because then you get like a Squid Game scenario pretty much, or Hunger Games or something.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing is, like, in our current world and thinking about DAOs as potentially functioning as countries, it would be interesting to see if cities could function basically as countries. Like in the United States, as far as government goes, you have towns and cities, and then you have counties and states, and you have the federal government. For the most part, you don't really need a federal or a state or a county government. It's like an improper, like, humans don't organize themselves in that way. They organize into homes and buildings and communities and towns and cities. They don't organize into these like arbitrary borders and stuff like that. So it'll be interesting to see if cities can begin to function as their own countries, and then, interoperate and trade and network together and stuff like that. And maybe we just have a lot more countries, but they're a lot more empowering, and they're not just, they're not so easily controllable, and the people have independence and stuff, the way that we read about in that book, More Equal Animals.
Yes, it's the micro scales to the macro, essentially. Yeah, as a community, it's quite interesting. I think if there's a balanced approach to incorporate what currently exists with infrastructure into a DAO-like structure, then the transition could be made, and the competitive nature of us as humans would be incorporated into a DAO. That you can't eradicate that mechanism, but if it's incorporated to help negate it, then infrastructure should work or could work. So, but I do think it's something that needs to be considered as DAOs become more prevalent, and the competitive nature of ourselves is present or becomes present. If it's something that we anticipate in advance, and we can negate it before it happens.
Yeah,
I think what. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Gav. You just jump back.
Yeah, I've got trouble with my mobile battery. I'm having to replace the cable to charge it, and then I haven't got my earphones, and I haven't got my big wireless headphones, so a bit of a mess. Really interesting what Josh is getting at. The trouble, like, I think nation states are under a lot of pressure. The Keynesian socialism is failing them. They're running out of other people's money to spend, making it's more difficult for them to tax. And things like blockchain are changing how financial systems and ecosystems work. The challenge that we have is that the nation state still provides a valuable function of self-defense. So even if we get rid of the borders of countries, we will end up having, as existed in the past, we can talk about tribes and local communities, and only up to a few hundred years ago, into thousands of years in history. The fact is that there was never peace on earth. there was always marauding, savage groups that were attacking and conquering and raping and pillaging. We have to be able to account for that. We have to bring defensive mechanisms into what we're building, not just in our digital life, but also in our physical life. So if we are going to get rid of nation states, if we are going to reduce borders, and we are going to reduce back to governing local towns and communities, we have to account for the physical defense as well as the digital defense that we're all going to need to be free and healthy.
Exactly my point. Yeah.
And a brief historical side note is, and again, I don't discount the need for physical defense in the modern context, but it is worth noting that if you ever read like The Chalice and the Blade or any of these other anthropological research into different sites around the world, like Çatalhöyük in what is modern day Turkey, is like evidence of a city that existed. There are a handful of these also in Crete, where no weapons or fortifications at all to be found anywhere, that apparently lived for, thousands of years with this like conflict-free world. What they had in common was they were more matriarchal or partnership society type focus. Often find like goddess figurines and stuff like that. And of course, they were either destroyed by earthquakes and tsunamis or marauding warlike peoples that like came swooping in and were like, what are these idiots doing with no walls and weapons? Like, but it is nice to at least recognize that there perhaps were, periods throughout history where humans didn't even cognize the need to be in a state of like readiness to like wage war against their neighbors. They just was like a foreign notion to them. It's because to me that speaks to a glimmer of human nature that we kind of write off as like naive, but perhaps is not really that naive. And back to the competition and cooperation thing again, it's like if you read Peter Kropotkin's work on mutual aid and other stuff, you'll and think about the way animals, often cooperate to a lot. They'll compete to a certain extent to form hierarchy, but the tribe, but never at the expense of like destroying the social cohesion of the tribe or it going like all out war against their neighbors. Like it never turns into that or like devolves like the cohesion of the group. And I feel like that's possible for humans too. Just like, yeah, we got into this arms race sort of mentality and now we all live downstream of this scarcity game that has been set up for everybody, where we're all competing for fewer and fewer chips with greater and greater amounts of debt in circulation all the time. So,
Eric in the chat is following what you've been saying and in stating, there's always going to be a requirement for cooperation with other countries or other DAOs, for instance, where we are going to need resources from other locations.
mm-hmm.
There's always going to be a reason why we need collaboration with others. So one utopian concept would be that the world organizes under a unified DAO, one world order. But that's beyond my comprehension or capability or a solution to that process at the moment. But that would be one utopian concept. Alternatively, if there was some kind of trade agreement where expectations were met on all fronts, that could work. So ultimately, it comes down to resources, and once again, this tribal survival mechanism. But if not, there's going to be conflict. So perhaps conflict is inevitable.
Yeah, and what we're really talking about here, like in the context of, what Helios is doing and like the business that Helios is in, is there's problems in the world that need to be solved, and the space blockchain is becoming a breeding ground for things like DAOs or variations of DAOs. There's different definitions of, it's a whole debate even how to even define that word and what it is and all of that, which we've hinted at a little bit today. But the idea is that we need ways, we have real problems to solve, major problems that affect a lot of people, and we need ways increasingly to solve those problems. And problems that affect a large number of people are the kind of problems that should be funded if you can make a viable business case for it. Because a viable business means that it will sustain itself. Whereas like our current governments, for example, for the most part, they don't operate as businesses, and they basically through force take other people's money, and they have to constantly be doing that because they don't have a sustainable business model. And maybe at such a large scale, a federal or a state government, maybe it's hard to do that, to get people to want to voluntarily pay for that kind of membership, unless maybe it's like a really good protection service or something. At a city or a community level, I think you can create, you don't have to tax people involuntarily. You can create a membership that's worth paying for, with benefits that are probably more valuable than what you can put together by basically stealing money from people. And that's the kind of mindset that the world needs to solve problems. It's the entrepreneurial mindset. And so even though there's still a lot of the not so entrepreneurial mindset going into things like DAOs, I hope that the direction that things go and the disruption maybe a little bit to the VC world, the traditional VC world, and even the crypto VC world a little bit, I hope that some of the mentality of how to approach building something like the startup world kind of mentality, I hope that really seeps into these communities, because from what I can see, it's still very much lacking. And so if we're really going to solve these problems, that's the kind of mindset that we need. I think personally.
Yeah, well said. And thank you for bringing this back down to ground. Way out there.
That's what happens when you invite me on. Sorry.
Yeah, what do you do to me?
Yeah, human nature. Oh.
So back to Eden tomorrow.
Yeah.
Chris, you're running. Do you want to talk to us about your position, your agenda? What do you have in mind?
I'm only showing up just in the first round of vote. I probably won't run to move forward unless those in the first round with me seem to be unwilling to move forward themselves, or just no one that I think is deserving to move forward. Then maybe I'll try to put myself forward. But generally speaking, I'd like to just vote this time around and give some other people a chance to have the opportunity to move forward and shape the organization.
Makes
Wax,
sense.
are you participating?
I will be. Yes. Just play my part. I don't necessarily have too much of an agenda, but I'll be there to vote for the most eligible within my first group. And who knows? I might move forward if no one else wants to move forward, and we'll see how it goes. But I have no particular planned agenda. But maybe this is my first run through as well. This will be my first go. So I missed the last election, so it'll be interesting to see how it works. Joshua, you're going through?
Well, my approach is going to be kind of similar to you guys. I have a lot of ideas and things I'd like to see happen, and hopefully in the first round, I'm in a room with some people that, at least one person that I feel like shares the same vision and is willing to make those moves. My attitude in Eden is that I don't feel like I need to be a chief delegate or something to contribute and get things done. I do think some things need to happen, and I think the chief delegates are going to have the power to do that. So as long as depending on who I get in a room with, hopefully I can just advance them to the next round. If not, maybe I'll have to go on to the next round, and then maybe I'll find somebody that can be advanced. But I'll try to be avoiding going to the final round if I can help it, which was my strategy last time.
which didn't end up working out, I guess.
No, it did work out. I wasn't in the room that I was in. I was not happy about John Williamson moving on, even though I really like him, and I wasn't happy in the room for him moving on, and some of the people that kind of pushed him through, because he didn't seem to have he just wanted to work on his project, and I didn't feel like that was the intention of Eden. I felt like we were supposed to represent the people that we got into rooms with, and there's kind of a broader mission we're supposed to be supporting, like being leaders. And John has been a leader, and he's a great guy. But in that particular moment, I was kind of like, and then I lost internet connection. I was able to vote on my phone, but yeah, it was like, hey, what about these? What about the? Are you going to represent the people? What happened here?
Yeah.
But I was still happy about the outcome. To be honest,
it's actually, and it's funny because if you pay attention to some of those calls, John might have been one of the more tricky ones to achieve consensus with. Sometimes he kind of strong-minded in some of his views. So we were having discussions about, like, he didn't even, if you notice in the bylaw, he abstained to vote for them. So, in terms of that idea of selecting for consensus builders, I'm not sure if that's necessarily, and I don't mean this a bad way to throw shade, but I don't know if that's necessarily one of John's strengths to really try to be good at building consensus. His project is great and he's a good dude. That's fine. But so this is another, I'm curious this time around, do we start to see, I think it's better for selecting for leaders. I think this is a consensus building thing, solving for consensus builders. And that hopefully is what comes out of this versus projects, because that is still a bit of a dichotomy in terms of what we're looking for. Because people are going to come with a project. Here's my project, vote for me. Well, what kind of leader are you? What does it matter? Here's my project, vote for me, right? So
it might be controversial, but I feel like the current budget with the current price of EOS, I think it's enough to incentivize participation, but it's not enough to actually get anything meaningful done. And I don't know if you guys share that feeling or not, especially the two here who had to manage budgets.
Totally.
I mean, what does it equate to in dollar value if you become a chief delegate?
Chris, what was it like during because you were treating it more like that? What was it? What did it amount to?
It was going to be at the time, at the election, it was just under $6,000 a month, but that was the price is less. So now I think it's a lot less than that. Just
like $3,000 a month or something.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's pegged in EOS, obviously.
So it's a weird thing, right? Because and this is something I've spoken of before, but like, if you just pay yourself to be, doing stuff for the community, well, you better be skilled at a lot of different things, because, it's not that what the community necessarily needs is just a person to like talk to everybody. We need all these different people working on different projects. We need to put people to work, doing all sorts of different things. And so it's nice to have those connector types that are like, okay, I see what needs to get done, and I'm going to get resources to those people. And that's a full-time job. I think it could be, but yeah, you're right, Josh. Like when the current budget, it can't be, because by the time you spend money to get to those people that are doing good things for the network, there's nothing left over to pay yourself, or you pay yourself and there's no money to give really to projects. So it's kind of like we're in this unfortunate, you have to choose one or the other, or just be like, if you just have enough money saved up and you don't need to work, then that's fine too. You might be able to do that and just like, just self-fund. But, I know a lot of people aren't in that position.
And things have changed so much too in terms of the landscape. When Eden first happened last October, the first official election, there was no Pomelo. There was no ENF grant framework that just came out, because that just came out like today, yesterday. So the landscape has really changed, where Eden is now not the only means, or ideally, like, it's not necessarily enough. It's not the ideal means to get a project, because it's also only 3 months. So you're going to be a delegate. Is that going to be enough funding over 3 months? And it may not be. So I think this is where I think most of us here would agree, like, this thing should be about choosing consensus builders and leadership qualities, that I think, and solving for trust. That's a far better use for Eden now. And because we have Pomelo, and we have the grant framework, which is awesome. And we have Helios, and like so there's these other means now for projects to get funding for projects. So let's let them do that. And let's start to pivot Eden towards something that is a leadership trust consensus building mechanism.
Is there anywhere stated that that should be the direction we should be taking for this Eden election? Is that the goal? Is that the elevator pitch?
It's up to the electorate. People
Yeah.
to vote on what. So it's a cultural thing, right? That's
Mhm.
we need to impress that, and that maybe that should become an intention that we try to express more openly and frequently to the community, to have that become ingrained as the culture.
Yeah,
I think to your point, Chris, now that these other projects are online, that becomes a more viable way to frame it to the community, and from a cultural standpoint, to get it to stick. Because before, when we had no real viable funding mechanisms for projects, it was just like pick and choose. But now, if you say run on Eden to like do good for the community, and to be a leader that the community needs to help set the direction and to set priorities and make sure shit gets done, and have your project in Pomelo, maybe use your position in Eden to support your Pomelo project. That's fine. Maybe it gives you a platform, which is something that Aaron brought that up yesterday, I believe, in our call.
Yeah.
He was talking about like how, and that's an interesting thing. It's kind of like the bully pulpit with a politician. Like, well, you just have the mic, so you can kind of set the cultural tone in a lot of ways. And I think we could have done that, but we were all a little. It was too ambiguous. Like, I don't think we felt like we had the mandate to be like, all right, here's the deal, because like Dan and other people still had their finger in the pie, so to speak, and so we felt kind of like hamstrung in some ways to be bold in different ways that we might have otherwise been bold in choosing a direction for the community. But I don't think that this next group needs to suffer under that same ambiguousness, because with Eden kind of declaring its independence from the Clarion OS now Fractally team, that people are free to like say, I think we should go this way, and then people can rally around it or not. And like Chris said, like the group, the electorate can set the tone.
Because the issue we had is that there was this understanding that Dan was this was his baby. He had said it. He explicitly said, this is his game, his rules. He's gonna charge. He's gonna do the bylaws. He has God powers for the next year. Okay, well that kind of, then I guess we won't do much along those lines. And so the next group, that isn't the expectation. So it's been disambiguated. Now, like, it's very clear, like, no, this is, you have the opportunity to ratify these bylaws and then change them. And there's no expectation that someone else is going to do it for you. So I think that's definitely an advantage to this group.
And that's why I think the next group should ratify the bylaws, and we should all vote for Gabriel to be the product marketing manager, so we can get some stuff done.
Yeah, I mean, that's where some of the ideas from Hi-Fi, I feel like, could really augment Eden.
Yeah.
Like, Eden doesn't need to change like the fundamental consensus process that it uses, but if it could use that process to help determine roles that might be filled, like, at the pleasure of those who are elected, and that would provide continuity between elections, where it's just like a lot of this, because we had a hard time figuring out a way to like pool funds without ending up being seen as a legal entity or this and that, as opposed to just a bunch of individuals kind of working together. I feel like the community could use even like that, just that spreadsheet that Hi-Fi created is brilliant, to kind of lay out what are the different roles, how do we select for roles, how do we decide who goes where and fills what function for what period of time, when we revisit that, who. And so there's a lot of cool hybrid options, and sky's the limit as far as I'm concerned. Like, the gloves are off, like, let it fly, dude. Community can do what they want.
Well, so here's one question then, right? That I think we get is, we were talking, you guys were talking about DAOs. I did a lot of listening. That was great. But I think often there's still this idea of like, what's the point? It's great, nice words, very fluffy, it's all wonderful, but like to do what? Like I'm very pragmatic. I'm very much a hands-on doer. So as much as I love ethereal brain flexing, it's like until I can actually put my finger on it, it still feels that and then
Yeah, and then what?
Eden, right? It's like, okay, we're going to select for trust building consensus leaders, and then
Yep.
like
Yep.
we still don't have that part. Like, well, to do what? So, and it's a question that hopefully gets addressed. Like, I think that's to me is a question that people need to like let's talk about that. Like, what are we trying to do here, and what is our intention?
So Josh's answer is to stop the World Economic Forum in its tracks.
Well, the first step is to hire you as the product marketing manager, so we can get the ball rolling with this.
Josh,
project.
I was going straight for the jugular on these issues.
Chris, just curious then, like what might be do you have a perspective, a personal perspective on what you see as goal, either big picture or more close to EOS community? Or are you still actually in that kind of discovery phase for yourself?
I've put forward a proposal of what I thought Eden could become, and that was equivalent because there's a nice apples to apples comparison in Telos, where Telos has a Telos Foundation board, and that board is voted by token holders. So it uses a stake weighted vote using their decide voter tool, and they vote for this board, a traditional board. And then that board has basically some spending oversight as accepted by the block producers, and they appoint the executive director of their equivalent to the ENF. And so to me, that would be like we're not there yet though. Like that's the thing, like in Telos, it's sensible that the token holders use their stake and they have skin in the game, and then they select this board. That's rational. I think that's a goal for Eden. Challenges, of course, we're single language. That's a problem. We don't represent all the community. We don't deserve that type of influence. But I think that to me is a good goal. If we can have a couple different Edens that then come together and they select Eve, because he's the right guy. And I always want to clarify this. It's not that I want to see someone other than Eve be in that position. I think he's absolutely the right guy for the job. And the means by which he's appointed and the oversight is then through this process. And this becomes the DAO and the governance structure that becomes the oversight, or just some oversight. And that to me is a meaningful purpose. And then the elections itself solve for that. I think I should be on that board because I'm a good judge of character and I've been following the ecosystem, and I'm going to I know finance, so I can be a counter of like an oversight to the spending or whatever. Like that becomes part of your pitch, and you can trust me, and I'm a consensus builder, and blah, blah, blah. That is one way perhaps this could go.
So what does that lead to? Having the board that governs kind of Eve's remit to an extent, for what purpose? Kind of asking you the same question you asked is and then what? To
run the chain, to have influence and direction and oversight to help shape and curate the direction of EOS, the actual blockchain.
And so and that doesn't exist now in Eden as its objective.
No. Eden has no teeth in terms of actual influence. We have a voice, but that they're just words. Like we have no teeth. And that was the part of the idea of doing the Eden members proxy that I started from last July. Was like, okay, well, let's give us some teeth. Eden members can then use their voice, their vote, as they rate block producers. And then the ratings of those Eden members, because it's all filtered out, they get then curated into a list of BPs, and then the proxy will vote for those BPs. But unfortunately, you still need the stake to get behind that proxy to have it have any teeth, and it doesn't. So it still... intention was there to try to give us some influence in the direction of the chain, but it still required the weight of the actual stakeholders, which never took place. And that's the big challenge, right? It's words. Right? We need to have it's adding teeth to this thing and giving it some actual raison d'etre. That's still missing. And so I don't know. It's no easy answer, but I think that's a question we should keep asking ourselves.
Yeah. So if Eden arrived at that as the objective, does it still actually have the power to impose that objective?
It would need to be accepted by, in the end, the BPs are king. They're the ones who make all the decisions in the end. So, and the BPs are selected by the stakeholders, the whales. So and same with the Telos Foundation board. it only has power so much as far as the block producers are willing to grant it. And that's delegated proof of stake, right? In the end, this isn't Bitcoin, where, I mean, in Bitcoin, you got 51% of the miners have the ultimate say. But in this case, it's 15 of 21 of the block producers have the ultimate say as far as a blockchain, as this blockchain goes. That's where the power truly lies.
Which again, to me, suggests that the objective of Eden should be to select or vote or appoint block producers that it thinks will govern the chain appropriately, correct?
I don't know. It's like a chicken and egg, right? I'm not sure. Like, I like the idea that stake, like having skin in the game, and therefore you've earned your voice via capital. To me, that's sensible. It's like, why does Eden deserve the ability to pick block producers? Why do we feel that entitlement? I'm not
okay. So in terms of publicizing the types of block producer that are available and facilitating a community-wide voting process or staking process that then subsequently elects the BPs. So the Eden should be there to influence the BPs that get selected.
They could. It's possible, yeah. Like I've yesterday call, we talked about this, where you could have like where the Fractally proposal was to have just 11 BPs appointed from individuals who are participants and then successful in this type of election. To me, that's kind of bizarre, just to say half the BPs are appointed and half are stake weighted. I mentioned on that call that I thought it made a little more sense maybe to have the Fractally, or in this case Eden, could become a filter of BPs, and we would then have as our job, our mandate, to speak with all the BPs, have a dialogue, confirm that they have infrastructure, confirm that they have their socials and they're reachable and they're accountable, and then from that filter have the stake weighted process then select the BPs, because you can still have 50 BPs applying and going through this filter successfully, but only having 21 produced blocks. Well, then great, then have the 21 selected via stake weight as it currently is, except have them first get through that filter, which is not that dissimilar to what the OIG does in Wax.
I guess it depends how much faith you put into the Eden election process as to selecting the right people for the right job. Because ultimately, if we had the right people within the community taking part, that they would be the optimum group or groups to select BPs, not the person or exchanges with the most tokens to select themselves as BPs. So I think it would be better if we had a functioning Eden process to solely manage the BPs if it was a successful process and could elect the right people to select the right BPs.
What if BPs, what if there was a separate Eden just for BPs as members, and then they have to go through election processes and select who the BPs are going to be? So the BPs select the BPs.
Yeah, or the BPs could enter a regular Eden election as to represent themselves as the correct candidate.
But that becomes like a more narrow sort of like collection of people selecting who.
Exactly.
You know, it's already.
Yeah,
like I personally, I favor the idea of some form of hybrid stake and democracy, fusion. I just don't know exactly what it looks like. I think Eden could get there, but Eden needs first to be inclusive of the broader community, of which it's not right now. When we say Eden too, like we're kind of just talking about English Eden, but there's Eden China, Eden Korea. There's got to be a whole Latin American crew coming up. There's, Turkey, Vietnam. I'm sure there's other like major Russia, Japan, like other major, communities.
Yeah.
Apologies if I've missed any major groups out there, but so until we can have like a pretty broad spectrum of these different, bodies of electorates that are all unified in improving EOS in some way, shape, or form, working through this Eden election process and then producing somebody at the top, like then you could theoretically form a board of governors almost, like, and they could have a seat at the table potentially. What that seat looks like and what that influence looks like is a matter of debate. But, like for instance, right now, Eve is kind of the conduit, but he doesn't really he kind of serves at the pleasure of like both the block producers and the board of directors, essentially, or I don't know what the board, let's say, that oversees what Eve's doing. So if Eve totally goes off the rails and starts doing crazy stuff, they can say to the BPs, hey, like, this is no good. Like, we've got to put a stop to this.
Yeah.
So there is kind of like a check there in the system currently. It's just that check is just as, it's appointed by merit at this point, and people who have like really paid their dues in the system are there at the seat, have a seat at the table, but it's by no means like an inclusive process selected, across like every conceivable community that's developing on EOS. But let's be honest, like whoever is still in EOS has really paid their dues and deserves to have some sort of influence, and is probably like, in a good spot on that board. The other thing I wanted to point out too that's important to remember is that now that we do have direct grants and we do have Pomelo, we do have other mechanisms of funding such as Eden, it's less critical for the block producers to produce all these public goods, which was once the original. Now we really need the block producers to just be really good block producers and produce blocks, and maybe API and other history solution and run other infrastructure to make sure technically that the EOS network is like top notch, really good. We can let other teams, even augment the code and keep bringing things up to speed. We kind of need the block producers to just be really good block producers now, and we can fund. We don't need the inflation that's going to block producers to fund all this other stuff, which was kind of the original dream, I think, in a lot of people's minds. It's like, I know for me, when EOS first launched, we were thinking, and I was part of EOS Detroit, and our whole shtick was like, yeah, we're producing blocks, but we're also like really community focused, and we're also, going to work on all these other initiatives to like help bring value to the community. And it ended up that wasn't really enough, on the table to do that kind of all that work. And then of course it became a competition for resources with votes and stuff. So long-winded, but just to say that the game has changed a lot now that there's other modes of funding. So I share Chris's ideas in a lot of ways, but it's more about just optimizing the network as a whole. And the block producers are just one component of that now, whereas before they were really everything. So now it's like the game has changed considerably.
And this is, I think, Dr. Wu, and thank you, Dr. Wu, for all of your participation here. But Eden isn't. I agree with this. We're not qualified to have us select the BPs. Like that's a totally different kind of election process. You're solving for different people if that's what you want to have the output. And I totally agree with that. So, and this is what are we really trying to do as Eden? And if it's a governance thing, and this is the other question, like, what does EOS really need? We don't really technically have a BP problem. We have a user problem, and we have an application deficit problem. And so is this even a useful useful focus of brain energy right now to even worry about this? And so maybe not. Like, one thing though is at least with Eden is as like maybe a cookie cutter, like an app that anybody can come to EOS, and if you want to build a DAO, kind of like what Hef is doing, but if you want to build a DAO, well, you can use the Eden process now and come to EOS and click the button and start your DAO. Okay, well, that would bring users. I think that's maybe maybe that's what we do for the next little while with Eden, is just figure out how to scale and have other Edens. And that's it. It doesn't need to have influence over EOS and more influence in the chain, and just treat it like an app. That seems worthy.
Yeah, and just a note on that is, I feel like if Eden deserves more influence, it'll get it. Like, if Eden evolves to a point that's inclusive and representative of the chain broadly, of the communities that comprise the of EOS, it will get a seat at the table in some way, shape, or form.
Well,
whether that's just development priorities or block producer, blah, 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 is up to...
The people who have a seat at the table already are predominantly Eden members.
True.
So...
Yeah, it's like, in essence, we've already... Yeah, I mean, but the membership could grow considerably, and
And
that's
and yet a survey has not been done of the Eden community. So you're electing for people. There's an election, and each person has an agenda, but there hasn't been a collection of requests or ideas from the general community. It seems I would have imagined that would be a good opportunity.
could
Should
you
have been
say
done at the very beginning, the critical beginning of Eden. What do we
wait
want
it,
to achieve, right?
okay, like what do we
Yeah,
see?
it's a basic business question that anyone would ask.
Yeah.
But I feel like the process itself is determining what we want to achieve, because it's
Well,
like you're in a
what?
room with
So
6
was
other
it?
people.
Yeah, I got that. So what did it want to achieve last time, and has it achieved that? Or where is the report on how well it's achieved that? And does the community agree that it achieved what it should have? And like again, then you do another survey to find out. Well, okay, that's what we did last time. That's what we wanted to do. What do we want to do now?
Yeah, let me chime in on this one for a sec. So Dan had a clear intention that he reiterated, and the community had its own needs and ideas, and
Yeah.
completely, for the most part, veered away from that. So in the last election, people wanted funding for their projects. Funding for their projects is pretty much not a problem at this point. And Eden is not actually the best source for it, unless you just want to pay yourself to do things in the community as like a contributor to a DAO. If you get to the chief delegate status, then maybe that's going to be enough, to at least do something on the side to contribute. So there's a dilemma right now where a lot of questions need to be asked and answered, and a lot of groundwork needs to be done. And Eden members basically need to take the bull by the horns and take custodianship of the organization, and rather than kind of being in limbo like it was for a while, which the current delegates have kind of taken the shackles off. If the key is there, if you just basically turn it and walk through the door, basically.
And to your point, Gav, as well, I would say Eden's been pretty successful so far. If you look at the outcome, I mean, I don't know what, I mean, just a brief survey of the chief delegates, like Helios, Chris Barnes assembled this amazing team, and you all came together, like like in the middle of that moment of the administration. I guess I keep calling it administration, but it feels like an awkward word for the era we live in. I ended up joining the ENF, doing communications, and then the bees. Jesse got to to create the bees, which has been, I think, pretty damn successful and like amazing. I was one of Jesse's biggest critics at the beginning. I was like, this is going to totally spiral out of control. It'll be a complete mess, But if anything, he's just, every time there's a challenge, he's like really carefully addressed it. He's been really straightforward about it. Like the bees have found some way to address like that challenge, and they're turning into like this pretty amazing, outreach org. And then Randall, EOS support, it's like I don't even need to say anything more. Like EOS support is a force to be reckoned with as well, and has provided like incalculable amounts of value to the EOS community when it was like unable to field answers for how to get anything done in the current state that we're in. And John, has been tinkering on Violet Garden and, kind of trying to revitalize or like bring the vision of like voice kind of like back, some sort of social platform. And of course now he joined the Fractally team, which is, working to pioneer both, social and more fractal democracy stuff. And then other delegates, like Chuck McDonald provided all sorts of like really cool assets for the community to use, doing like 3D stuff with Blender, as well as video editing and transcribing stuff for the chief delegates or making clips. And Lenny did like amazing notes for the community to help people digest, content more easily if they're not like reading the Telegram channels every day. It's like, there's a bit of a brain drain problem in EOS generally, and I think what happened is the people that rose to the top in Eden just got picked off into like different, either by their own choosing, because they wanted to run that project, or because other people identified them as like good people to work with in the community. And it's going to happen again. So it's like one point does not like show you a trajectory, right? Like you need at least 2 or 3 points to really see like the direction things are moving in. And I think the next election and the election after that are really going to show what Eden's capable of. We've only just, these are the awkward first steps, that we've taken. And I think a survey is a really good idea, and someone should probably take that on. So
It's hard to believe it's been 6 months. It still blows my mind.
yeah, especially considering I think we aged like 2 years in that time.
Well, and this whole thing's a year old. A year ago this time, I remember taking notes on the AMAs. That was my intro into the community, essentially. Dan was doing weekly AMAs about the protests in advance of the first trial election. And I was like, oh, okay, take some notes.
Yeah, Eden isn't even a year old. I mean, Dan first formed the Eden members only group on Telegram on March 21st, but it wasn't until like May 18th.
The first 14th.
14th, yeah. So yeah, it wasn't until May 14th that, like, if you want to call that the birthday. So we're not even a year old yet.
Yeah.
Yeah, so all of the current chief delegates are prominent community leaders, and three of the 6 joined new companies that are moving and shaking. And 2 of them, Randall and Jesse, were relatively unknown before Eden and created, valuable brand new initiatives. But I would argue that the Eden budget so the process definitely selected good community leaders. The current budget has not really done much for their, for them personally, or for the community, for their initiatives and stuff. Like the Bees and EO support can't survive with their current Eden allocations. They probably couldn't even survive if they were sortition winners. Even if the price of EOS went back up to where it was, there's still a lot of work to be done for Eden itself as an organization. Like if we're going to select people to be contributors of the DAO, they're going to need money to build things, and they're going to need money to kind of, I hope this isn't, I want to feel like I'm borrowing like some of the mentality that Eve uses sometimes, and I hope I'm remembering this correctly. But basically, the amount of catch up that EOS has to do with the current market, actually, I think this might be Dan's words, we need to incentivize people multiple times more than they would if they were in another ecosystem.
Overpay.
Like maybe at least 3 times more to contribute here rather than somewhere else, because the adoption, the capital, everything, the momentum is somewhere else. Maybe not long term, but at least right now and for the foreseeable future. It's sad to say, but there's kind of like there's even opportunity cost to some degree playing in our current ecosystem, which doesn't have to be a bad thing, but we just kind of need to recognize the reality, which I think most people have, and not sugarcoat it with what we're doing with things, but also not sugarcoat it. I don't know. I actually, I would kind of like stakeholders in Helios to think about that a little more deeply, to be honest, in terms of being competitive.
Yep. Well, gentlemen, we've been going a solid hour and a half. Not bad.
I think we could I feel like we could just keep going forever.
This is
we could.
Yeah, we could just keep talking about this.
Yeah. It's really interesting.
So back to human nature. No.
Yeah. Well, thanks guys. This has been a great episode.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, Lovejoy. We're going to have you back for sure. You're a wonderful human being. I'm super thankful for having gotten the chance to get to know you over this past year. Thinking about I was just kind of reflecting on this past year for me has been pretty, because I was laid off from my job in March a year ago, and this has been a whole new life change to be involved in EOS, and a lot of that is just these relationships. Guys like you, Josh, Wax, I like getting to know all you is excellent, and so really, we'll have more conversations for sure. And if anything, I think we have to have a debrief. I think we're going to go on the Jimmy D show, right?
Yeah,
And
definitely.
But good luck emceeing tomorrow. I think you do a great job.
Thanks. Yeah, gotta stay on the ball. There's a lot of shenanigans could occur. I'm not careful. So
I hope some shenanigans occur in a good
yeah,
way.
you do.
It'll be fun if some funny things happen.
We'll roll with it. We'll roll with it.
What's emceeing? Is that like rapping? Or?
Yeah, I'm gonna rap.
Yeah, he was spinning some bars in Telegram.
That's right. Yeah. I actually had a fractally rap I was working on, but I haven't busted it out yet. So I'll save that for later. That's not for Eden though. It's I got to stay on brand. It's the Eden rap. I'll have to work on something. Yeah. No, MC is Master of Ceremonies, but it is the guy with the mic. Yeah. Oh, yeah. And my DJ is basically is Randall Rowland on, with Brandon Fancher in the background, making sure everything's running smoothly as backup,
Nice.
So
Chris plays guitar, so maybe you could get something going.
I already recorded my Eden song.
Are you going to
recorded it?
Are you going to remint it or promote the NFTs?
My Eden song. It's on Atomic Hub. You're welcome to check it out.
Yeah, I'll do a rap and put that out as an NFT. It's my pledge. Yeah.
Great idea.
We'll hold you to that.
Yeah, thanks.
Hold you to it.
Looking for it. You heard it here, folks.
The Eden Music Guild.
That's right. Yeah, and check us out.
Thank you to Eric and Dr. Wu in particular for all the comments we've had in chat today. Really appreciate you both being here. And all the other viewers that we've got.
All right.
Okay. Thank you all.
Take care, everybody.
Farewell.
Bye.